Welcome back to my ESS channel, and today we are diving into subtopic 2.2 where we will unpack the critical processes that keep our ecosystem functioning and explore how energy and matter move through our living world. So, let's get started. Here in this session, I will include SL and HL content both. So, in this topic, energy and biomass in ecosystem, we are going to understand how energy transfer occurs within an ecosystem, and we are going to study how producers consumers plays an important role in maintaining this ecosystem. So before understanding this thing, we need to understand what are the guiding questions. So here we are also going to understand how the flow of energy and matter gets modeled and how human actions affect this flow of energy and matter, and what kind of strategies we can employ to mitigate the human impacts on the natural cycle of energy and matter. So let's get started. So the first understanding is about how an ecosystems are sustained by energy and matter. In the previous video, we have discussed what an ecosystem is all about. We have seen that how the community interact with the abiotic factors, and how it is playing an important role in maintaining the food chain and food web. So in this subtopic, our main focus will be on the process of how the exchange of energy and matter occurs. So it starts with the solar energy. So there is this continuous supply of energy which needs to be there, and this solar energy is then fixed, or you can say consumed, by the producers. So producers will convert the sunlight into the chemical energy, and then that producers will produce glucose, and then these producers are then fed by the consumers, and through which the energy is transferring in them, and from consumers the energy is transferring into the decomposers. So this is how from solar energy to the producers to the consumers and then the decomposers. So this is how the energy flow will occur. So main thing here is that the energy is not recycled, and there should be the constant supply of energy which needs to be there, and that's why sun is very important here. And in this process, there is, energy continuous supply is required, so there is no energy which is, recycled. There are some energy, so it's not like that the complete energy is passing from producers to consumers. There are some energy which is also lost. So that lost energy is in the form of heat energy. That heat energy we can't use it, so that's kind of a waste which the process uh, you know occur, and from producers to consumers the heat energy is releasing. So the first law of thermodynamics is, if you have seen the previous slide properly, then you must have seen that how the first law of thermodynamics applies here, right? So the first law of thermodynamics says that energy can neither be created nor it can be destroyed, but it can be transformed from one form to the another. So that's exactly what is happening in the previous slide, right? So it's just the transfer of an energy which is happening. We are not able to create energy. You get the supply of energy continuously from the sun, and energy is also not destroying, right? So it's just a transferring which is happening in the ecosystem. So that's about. Now in exam, as far as your exams are concerned, they will, so in mostly in two ways they'll ask the question. In one case, they'll directly ask you to write first law of thermodynamics. So you need to remember this. And apart from that, they can also ask you to connect the first law of thermodynamics, because as this is an ESS subject, right? So they will ask you to connect it with the food chain, and then they will ask you to write the answer. So they may ask in around 4 marks or 1 mark or 2 mark. So mostly if they are asking both the laws, then they can ask in 7 marks, but if they're asking only one law, then I don't think so it would be more than 4 marks. So you don't have to go into that much detail, you just need to write the law and the connections with the ecosystem. So here the next understanding is about how these two complementary processes, that means photosynthesis and respiration, transforms energy and matter in an ecosystem. So both are responsible for the energy flow, right? So we know that photosynthesis is where the it is being performed by the producers. We also call them autotrophs, and it generally occurs in the chloroplast. The reaction is you need carbon dioxide, water, light energy, and then the glucose is forming along with the oxygen as the byproduct. And these glucose is something which is used by the consumers for doing cell respiration, and in that case, they'll produce the ATP. So, in this topic, you need to remember the inputs, outputs, and the equation, because in one of the past paper question, they have asked students to write the equation for the photosynthesis. So just make sure that you remember the equation. Now, how photosynthesis is able to convert light energy into biomass? So we know that uh, it is basically the glucose which is forming, right? So generally here what happens is that whenever the raw materials the plants get it with the help of the chlorophyll pigment, it will produce the biomass. So just make sure that you don't have to understand the process of photosynthesis in that much detail. You just need to understand its inputs, outputs, equation, and what is actually happening. So once the glucose is formed, it is stored as a biomass in the autotrophic organism, and when consumers consumed the plants, that biomass or that energy is transferring in them. Yeah, so biomass is basically the dry weight of an organism. Just make sure that you don't get confused with its actual weight. Biomass is not equal to weight, but it's equal to the dry weight of an organism. Producers are the first trophic level. So producers, all autotrophic organisms, comes under a first trophic level in the food chain, and examples are terrestrial plants, algae, photosynthetic bacteria, and these are the examples. So photosynthetic bacteria, there are certain microscopic organisms which are able to do photosynthesis, and they have this capacity that they can survive in the extreme environment. And the examples here are mentioned, that is cyanobacteria and purple sulfur bacteria. So these are we can say that the old bacteria, so they were present in the environment way before the other organisms have evolved, and that's why this bacteria has the capacity to survive in the extreme environment. So why producers are essential? Because they are the only organisms on the earth which has the capacity to fix the solar energy into the ecosystem. Otherwise, no other organism. These are the only organism through which the energy can be fixed, the solar energy can be absorbed, and oxygen production can happen. So carbon fixation process is something which is being done by them, and it also has a role in a hydrological cycle that we will study when we will do the chapter 4, that is water. Respiration is something happens in consumers where the energy from glucose by converting it into ATP. So glucose gets broken down and it produces an ATP, and that ATP is used by the consumers to do the various processes like movement, growth, repair, production of DNA, proteins, signal transmission, and gamete production. And these are simplified equation. Again, in photosynthesis, you have to remember the definition, inputs, outputs, its function and equation. Similarly, do it for respiration, inputs, outputs, its function and its equation. And as I've said, that the transfer from producers to consumers is never 100%. There is some percent of an energy which is also lost, and that is in the form of an heat energy. And you can't use that heat energy. It's kind of a waste or the lost which happens. So that is something you cannot be converted back into the chemical energy by living things, but it's lost from the biological system forever. So it's kind of a waste. Now, coming to the second law of thermodynamics, it's all about entropy. So, before understanding second law of thermodynamics, you should know what is entropy. So, generally, I give this like a common example, like if there is a class, right, and there is this another class. So, there is in one class, when teacher is not present, the class is not organized, right? So students are talking, they are moving, they are not in their place, and it's like a chaos which is there when teacher is not present. So it's not that organized, or it's disorganized, or the people or the students are randomly, scattered. In the same time, if there is this another class and if there is the presence of teacher, then all the students are very organized, and they are not in randomly, they are seated properly, they are arranged properly. So there we call it as an organized. So generally entropy means it's a randomness in the system. So now in ESS perspective, or in the environmental perspective, entropy means a randomness. So generally when there is a more movement, or when there is a more complexity, then there is more entropy. So in case of food chain, we call that producers will have the least entropy, and as we move from one trophic level to another trophic level, the entropy increases, and as entropy increases, the energy level decreases. So they are always inversely proportional. So if there are more energy, there is less entropy, and if there is a more entropy, there is less energy, right? So it's like a, if you see the food chain, the maximum energy is present in the lower trophic level compared to the higher trophic level. So that is about the second law of thermodynamics. Now, coming to the consumers, so we know that there are different kinds of consumers. Okay, there are some consumers which eat only plants, or they feed only on living plants or algae. Examples are deer, rabbits, caterpillars. So they are basically, we call it as herbivory. There are other organisms who hunt and kill other animals. They are the predation or predatory organism, predation. Then we have parasitism, which live on or extract nutrients from the host. Example, tapeworm, fleas, mistletoe. Then we have detritivore, who feed on dead organic matter like earthworm, millipedes, and woodlice. Then we have saprotrophy organism, which secretes enzyme on dead matter and then absorbs nutrients. Example, fungi, decomposer bacteria. And then we have these scavengers, which feed on already dead animals like vultures, crabs, hyenas. So these are the different types of consumers. So depending upon that, we have different examples. In this topic, you should be able to classify an organism feeding strategy depending on their feeding strategy. And you should not be confused with detritivores and saprotrophs. It's very commonly student gets confused, and they specifically ask students to differentiate between detritivores and saprotrophy. So just remember, detritivores feed on dead organic matter, while the saprotroph secretes enzyme on dead matter and then absorbs nutrients. So just remember the examples also. The next understanding is about food chain. Again, a very common question they ask in database. They will give you a food chain and then they will ask you to draw a food chain or draw a food chain with the five trophic levels. So that's also one of the most common question I have seen in the past paper. So just see that if it is five organism coming, you can write that, or four trophic levels. Sometimes they ask for four trophic levels, sometimes they ask for five trophic levels. So like here, green plants is prototrophs, that's first trophic level. Then we have rabbit, then we have fox, and then we have hawk, right? Similarly, we have it for plants, then we have rabbit, fox, and then we have owl. Now, in some example, they have given one more organism which comes in between, then it becomes the phytrophic level. So if they ask you to write four, just see that and you can mention the food chain. Just make sure that the arrows are very important. It should not be inverse. It should be like plants and then arrow, then rabbit, then arrow, then fox. Sometimes students do this mistake that they don't write an arrow properly. So make sure that you correctly identify the starting and the ending levels. So this is an example given of the food chain. Plants, grasshopper, frog, snake and hawk. Then we have, so arrows shows the direction of the energy flow. That is important, and it should be from the food to the eater, and each organism feeds at a specific trophic level. So these are the levels: producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and then we have the tertiary consumers. So exam skill is that if the data is given, then you should be able to construct a food chain and label all trophic levels. Arrows always point in the direction of energy transfer. That's important. So here, what moves between the trophic level? That's the question. So we know it's not just an energy, but it's also the carbon compounds, organic molecules like glucose, proteins and fats, because when consumers feed on the producers or when carnivores feed on the herbivores, it's not something an energy transferring, but how energy, like in what forms they are transferring. So they are transferring in the form of glucose, proteins and fats. So they carry both matter and energy. Like when a rabbit eats a grass, it gains carbon based molecules that the grass build from carbon dioxide. So that's how the transfer occurs. And this is about the energy losses. So not all energy available at one level reaches the next. So this is about the 10% rule. But again, 10% rule is not something very accurate. It can be 8% or it can be 12% also. But roughly it's a 10% rule. That means that from producers to primary consumers, 10% is transferring, and from primary consumers to secondary consumer, 10% energy is transferring. So this is how the energy transfer occurs, and 90% of an energy loss happens, and that's also the reason that there are no more trophic levels. There are always, less trophic numbers. It's never more than 5. It's always 5 or less than 5. So where does energy goes? So some organisms or parts are never consumed, like thorns, bones, roots. So again, that energy is not passing, right? So it's getting waste. Then there are certain materials which are not digested. They are consumed, but they are not digested, like cellulose, shells. Then there are certain parts, some absorbed energy used immediately for metabolism. So it is not stored as a biomass. And then there are some energy which is, like when cellular respiration occurs, it converts energy to ATP plus heat. So that heat is again a permanent loss which is happening. So net result is that only 10% of an energy is transferring. Now what is this gross primary productivity, or GPP or NPP, or gross productivity? So gross productivity or gross primary productivity is the total gain in biomass, and Net primary productivity is what remains after losses due to cellular respiration. So first we have the gross primary productivity, and then we have net primary productivity. So what is net? So whatever respiration loss has happened from GP, from gross primary productivity, the remaining is known as net primary productivity. So gross primary productivity is the total one, and once the respiration has occurred, the remaining portion of the energy is passing to the consumers, and that energy becomes the net primary productivity. So energy which is available in the consumers, so that's the net primary productivity, right? So example is given, like if a plant captures 100 units and if it uses 40 units for respiration, then 60 units is something which is available for growth and for herbivores to consume. Now, why food chains are short? I have answered this in the previous slide itself, that there is this 10% transfer efficiency and energy diminishes rapidly. So at last you don't have energy. After level 5 you don't have enough energy, and that's why the energy lost happened. These are about the food webs. So many food chain combines and it forms food webs, right? So it can be linear, simple, one path. So if it is a linear one, it's a food chain. If it is interconnected, realistic, and many, because in real life, okay, when you see forest, it's not that only one chain is happening, or it's not like the one food chain is working. It's like many food chains works together. So there is always this food web. There is many food chain interconnected, and there are so many overlapping paths, right? So that's actually you know, helps us to understand the stability of an ecosystem also, like how, why we need to understand how many food webs are there in a forest, because it helps in understanding the stability. It also helps us in predicting the impact of a species, right? So if there is one species whose population is decreasing, right, and then by understanding how the food web works, we can predict that how it can impact the other organisms. Okay, so that's how the food web matter. Okay, so now how can we understand, like these are all field work. Okay, so when we actually wanted to understand how it predicts, we can't just predict at our home, right? We need to go to the forest, we need to do some kind of a field study and experiments. So generally, the most common thing is that we took a sampling, right? So there is this biomass which we take. Okay, so biomass, as we have discussed, that's a dry weight. So how we can collect it? So method for collection and drying. So first of all, we need to collect the sample of an organism from the ecosystem. Then we dry the sample in an oven at a constant temperature until stable weight is reached. And then we will weigh the dry mass. Okay, and then we extrapolate from sample to estimate the total biomass of that. So we can't calculate each and every organism, right? So suppose if you want to understand the uh, you know, efficiency of some trees, right? So we can't take every tree. Okay, so we can just take the small sample, we may measure the dry mass of it, and then we'll estimate the total biomass of the trophic level. So that's a way of collecting it. And when you want to measure the energy content, we generally burn the dried sample in a calorimeter. So calorimeter is an instrument which will help us in understanding how much energy is present, and the whatever the heat is released, uh, you know, measure the water, and then we, you know, there is this experiment where we see that if you are drying that sample, how much temperature rise is happening. So that change in the temperature will help us in understanding the energy content. Again, we through that we'll calculate the total energy in the trophic level. So this is how manually we are doing it. So efficiency, to calculate efficiency. So just make sure that we always use dry mass, not wet mass, because water content varies enormously between an organism, and that doesn't represent the stored energy. So we generally take the dry mass. We have three pyramids: ecological pyramid, pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, and pyramid of energy. So basically, this is just a graphical representation of relative number. Okay, so if you're asking me to, you know, if you're asking me how many organisms are present in a forest, that would be very vague thing, right? And if you're showing it in the form of graphs, then that makes your work easy. So what you have to do is, you just have to see how many producers are present, how many primary consumers are present, and then use a graphical representation tool, and that will help us in you know drawing a pyramid of numbers. So generally it is so pyramid of numbers is not like that they have a particular shape. Here it is shown in a particular shape, but it's not like that this is the only shape they are present. Okay, so suppose in a forest the producers numbers are more, then we show it a larger bar size. If it is less, we show it accordingly. Okay, so this can be inverted. Pyramid of biomass usually upright, but can be temporarily inverted in an aquatic ecosystem. And pyramid of energy is always upright. Okay, so there is always more energy present in the producers, and the pyramid of energy can never be in another shape. Okay, so just make sure that it's the most reliable pyramid type, and that's why we mostly rely on pyramid of energy. We don't generally go for pyramid of numbers or biomass, because pyramid of energy is generally, we feel that's more reliable. So why it is always upright? Because of the second law of thermodynamics, the numbers and biomass pyramids can occasionally be inverted. Example, one large tree supporting many insects, right? So that is possible. So that's about the pyramids. Again, this is also like a common question where they ask you to write about different pyramids, and also its advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so just make sure that you know few advantages and disadvantages. Now, very important concepts: bioaccumulation and biomagnification, commonly asked in exam, and this is also an overlapping topic, so you will study this topic in another chapter also. So just remember the definition, the concepts. Most common example is DDT, which you can take. So whenever there is this non biodegradable pollutants like PCP, DDT, mercury, it causes the change in an ecosystem because it builds in an individual. Okay, so this DDT is something accumulates in a body of an individual, and it increases at each trophic level. Okay, so if it enters into a food chain, it can increase its concentration. So accumulation means increases within an individual organism over time because it absorbs, and magnify means increases at each trophic level. So when we are talking about accumulation, it's about individual organism, and magnification at each trophic level because predators consume many contaminated prey, concentrating the pollutant. So here the example they have given is for a fish swimming in water with low DDT concentration, absorbs DDT throughout its life, tissue concentrated builds up. And biomagnification is a bird eating 100 contaminated fish, accumulates the DDT from all 100 fish. So that's the difference. So this here they have given a classic example that from fight water to planktons, that is microscopic organism, then small fish, and then large fish, and then eagle, the concentration is increasing. So the same goes with microplastics. They absorb and concentrate like PCBs, DDT, and that's why it's very important we don't use plastics. How human activities impact the energy. So there are different activities like burning fossil fuel, deforestation, urbanization, agriculture. Because when you burn fossil fuel, then it will release the solar energy as heat, and then it will increase the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Similarly, if you will deforest, if you cut trees, then again it will reduce the photosynthetic capacity, and less energy is captured. It also reduces carbon fixation. It releases the stored carbon when burned or decay. Urbanization creates impervious surfaces, alters local energy budgets. Again, it will seal soil and it will disrupt the nutrient recycling. And when we use when we use fertilizers for agriculture, it again disrupts the nitrogen and phosphorus cycle, and also because of the monoculture. So what's the difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs? So autotrophs, something which produces organic compound. Heterotroph cannot fix carbon, but they can consume plants, and they are the other feeders, and autotrophs are self feeders. Just remember the examples also. So these are few of the key terms. Photoautotrophs and chemoautotrophs. So chemoautotrophs is something which uses chemicals and specific chemicals. So, and photoautotrophs, again, they drive carbon fixation using solar energy. That is, photo means light. So it contains pigments like chlorophyll to capture light. That is, terrestrial plants, green algae, we call them photoautotrophs. Chemoautotrophs generally use chemical reaction as an energy source, and with little or no light. So deep sea vent bacteria, nitrifying bacteria, they are all examples of chemoautotrophs. So coming to an HL content, just remember what is the productivity. So gross primary productivity is the total energy, that is total photosynthesis which is happening per unit time. And net primary productivity is something when you'll remove the respiration energy, the whatever the energy is used in respiration by the autotrophs. If you'll remove it, then whatever energy is remaining after that, that is the net primary productivity. So that is the energy which is available by the consumers. And secondary productivity is the gain in biomass by consumers using carbon compounds absorbed and assimilated. So secondary productivity means like whatever energy is remaining after their growth, reproduction, and predators, that is secondary energy. So we know that consumers will do ingestion, assimilation, respiration. So secondary net productivity is something assimilated food minus respiration. So that is the secondary productivity. So why NPP and not GPP? So net primary productivity is the basis of for food chain because it is the quantity of carbon compounds sustainably available to primary consumers. Because GPP is something the total energy, right? You can't calculate the total energy because anyway plants will do respiration and some of the energy gets lost. So the remaining energy is net primary productivity. So that is something which is left, right? What is maximum sustainable yield? So just by looking at the example, you can see that it's the number of organism which you can consume, and if you're exceeding that, it leads to the collapse of the ecosystem, right? So this I always say that if there is a forest and if there are 100 lions and every year 10 new lions are added into the system, now total we have 110. So how many you can hunt? So you can maximum hunt 10. That is the maximum sustainable yield. If you're doing it more than that, that is unsustainable. So that is maximum sustainable yield. You can't go above 10. So it's a maximum that can be harvested without depleting the original stock, right? Ecological efficiency is the percentage of energy received by one trophic level that is passed on to the next level. So this is the formula. Generally they don't ask, but if they are asking it, they will give the data already. So suppose producers have received 20,000 kilojoule of solar energy and converted it into 2500 kilojoule of biomass, then how much primary consumer will receive? So 2500 divided by 20,000 multiplied by 100, that is 12.5. So as I have said earlier, that's never 10% exactly. It can be 12.5, it can be 8. So it's an average which it's an approximately, we call it as 10% rule. So these are the key understanding, that how the entropy of the system increases as biomass passes through the ecosystem. So it's the randomness. So when sunlight is converted into chemical energy, then to heat, then the entropy increases because there is this more disordered or molecular motion which is happening. And each trophic transfers further increases entropy, energy becomes less concentrated, less organized, less useful. The total entropy of the universe always increases. This is the essence of the second law. Okay, so that's the connection. These are few of the vocabularies which you need to use when you're writing your answer, and these are the calculations which you should know when you're doing this subtopic. These are the common exam pattern. You should know the drawing food chain, food web. You need to know energy transfer calculation, GP and NP, what are the human impact analysis. So always use specific examples when you are writing 9 marker question, and always link your answer, your response to the concepts, because that will increase the specificity in your answer. And generally in ESS, students lose marks if they are writing vague responses. So just make sure that your answer is specific, you are writing different points, and you are providing examples. So you are showing your understanding and not just the knowledge. So, yes, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll meet in the next session.